Hello, my name is Mukesh, and in this video we're going to compare three earphones in the $50 to $60 price range: the Tin Audio T2, the Tin Audio T2 Pro, and the KZ AS10. Stay on to find out how they compare against each other. Now, if you're a bass head, I wouldn't recommend any of these. Say if you were listening to a lot of hip hop and would want something that would sound like subwoofers in your ears, then these are not for you. I would recommend maybe going for the KZ ZS3 or the KZ ZST, or one of those lineups which have a pretty bass heavy kind of a sound. Now, if you're just looking for my recommendation between the three, I would say go for the Tin Audio T2. It has a very detailed sound and the least amount of color where you don't really want it in the frequency spectrum. So let's look at the Tin Audio T2 in a little detail and then compare it against the other two. Now, the Tin Audio T2 has an amazing and a very detailed sound. It is also very open sounding. So the fact that it is available for something as little as $50, it is pretty shocking. Now, the frequency response of the Tin Audio T2, it's pretty strange. It is almost neutral till about 2 kilohertz, after which it starts climbing up by about 10 to 15 decibels at roughly about 3.5 kilohertz, and then it starts coming down by about 25 decibels at roughly about 9 kilohertz, and it starts climbing up. So as you would think about it, from 2 kilohertz onwards, there is no neutrality in sound. But the good part is, what it has managed to do is kind of minimize the harsh peaks. Although there is a jump by say 10 to 12 decibels, it doesn't feel harsh. In fact, it has done a great thing, which we're going to talk about in a bit. And the side after say 8 kilohertz, it's not very neutral sounding, but it is amazing. It sounds very clear. It sounds sharp, but not very fatiguing, not hurtful in nature at all. It sounds great, and it does sound unnatural a bit, but I would say that I like the sound a lot better than what they tried to do a little later, which we're going to talk about again in a minute. So from the aspect of the sound, starting from mids going up to highs, I would still say that these sound pretty amazing. Now, improve the sound of the Tin Audio T2 if you would want that, make them a little warmer, reduce the highs, give them a little more body. I would recommend to go for a copper cable, a standard oxygen-free copper cable should be just fine. You don't have to get those expensive cables, because that defeats the entire purpose. What you need is to mellow down the sound a little bit, and any decent cable, a copper cable, would do that just fine. Now, one thing I like to point out about the Tin Audio products, the Tin Audio T2 or the Tin Audio T2 Pro, is I'm not very happy with the cable. Although it is very soft, it also is very light, and it has very little microphonics. The problem that I have is that it is too light. What happens is, the moment you kind of put any of the headset down a bit, the cable starts kind of falling down, right? And this kind of affects the way that you would keep the cable, the way you would roll it, and all of that. So that is one thing that I did not kind of like about the cable. Now let's talk about the difference between the Tin Audio T2 and the Tin Audio T2 Pro. From the form factor, there is no difference. The jacks are the plugs are a little different, but everything else pretty much feels the same. The sound varies a little bit. Now, They have named the Tin Audio T2 Pro as the Pro, but there is really nothing pro about it. It's, you can't really have a 25 decibel variation in the frequency response between different frequencies and call anything pro. That just doesn't work. So now, what is the difference between the Tin Audio T2 and the Tin Audio T2 Pro that I have here? Now let's consider this, the black line. This is the frequency response of the Tin Audio T2, and the red one is the frequency response of the Tin Audio T2 Pro. The black one, as you would notice, it has like a 10 to 15 decibels peak at roughly about 3.5 kilohertz, which comes down at about like 9 kilohertz, and it comes down about like 25 decibels. Now, what they wanted to do is that they wanted this particular frequency range to sound a little more neutral. So they kind of pump this up a little bit, and that does make the Tin Audio T2's Tin Audio T2 Pro's higher frequency sound a little better, but they also start sounding a little harsh. As you would also notice, that one of the things that happened in trying to do this is that the peak at the 3.5 kilohertz also went up by a few decibels. That has so this kind of sound really it has made it sound a little more natural, but at the same time it has made it sound kind of harsh at the higher frequencies. Now, the only way that you can actually compare the Tin Audio T2 T2 Pro and the KZ AS10 is if you actually cover the vent or the sound hole in the Tin Audio T2s or the T2 Pro with something like cellophane tape or any other tape. Basically, the Tin Audio T2 and the T2 Pro, they don't have a very good bass. The Tin Audio T2 Pro's bass is maybe just a tad bit better, but I didn't notice too much of a difference. But if you cover the small hole near the nozzle or at the nozzle, the Tin Audio T2 and the T2 Pro both get like about a 10 to 12 decibel bump in bass, and they become like pretty good at bass. From the aspect of something being negative, when you cover the vent or the hole, I didn't really notice much of a difference. Some people say that there's a certain amount of difference in the openness in the sound, but I didn't. My ears didn't notice that difference. In fact, with the bass kicking in so much, I found the sound amazing. So the Tin Audio T2 variants, they are kind of lean sounding, and they sound very detailed, they sound very open, but when I were to talk about, or if I were to talk about KZ AS10, they sound a little more closed, and the AS10, they have some sort of a peak at about like 5 kilohertz, which actually tends to sound pretty harsh to me. And there's also some sort of a treble roll-off that these have. So the highs are really not as crisp or as detailed as the Tin Audio T2 or the T2 Pro. But there's one thing that I found very strange in all of these. The KZ AS10, they are all balanced armatures, so they are supposed to have a very good frequency response on the higher end of the frequency spectrum. They should have like pretty good treble, very crisp, very clear treble, but they don't seem to have that. I don't know why. The plus point is definitely that they have done a great job with the balance armature at the base level, Balance armatures generally don't sound, or at least in the budget range, they don't tend to sound very good. But they have done like KZ AS10, they've done a good job with the bass at that level. Uh, the Tin Audio T2 and T2 Pro, uh, they have dynamic drivers. Now, dynamic drivers, they have a warm sound. They are supposed to have uh, not. I mean, they can't. They don't like generally tend to sound very crisp. They have a good detail in highs, but you generally need tweeters for that crisp sound, something like a silk dome tweeter or any fabric tweeter. But these have amazing sound. I mean, in fact, the sound is even better than balanced armatures at the high frequencies. So that's like pretty good. I somehow have a feeling that they have like one woofer and one tweeter in these. I mean, at least that's what it really sounds like. Now, the one thing that hasn't been spoken about the Tin Audio T2 and the T2 Pro is how good they are for orchestral music. Now, with the fact that they are a little lean sounding, I would not have expected that they would sound good for orchestral music. They have a fantastic feature. Let's talk about that for a minute. Now, consider that these are two speakers, and what you would want is your earphone to sound like this, that you're like at a certain distance from the speakers, and so the speakers have a height, and it should not sound that it is coming from one tiny source. But most of the earphones, you would not get that kind of a distance. You would get something like this, which would like feel that the sound is actually originating from your from the ears itself. Now, the Tin Audio T2, they are open sounding. They sound a little like this, where you do get a certain sense of space. Now, a good part about the frequency response that I just spoke about, how there is a certain jump or a hump in frequency response at about 3.5 kilohertz, and then it suddenly goes down. What that has ended up doing is that, now let us first say that if you were to take that out, right, you would get a little more depth in the sound. You would get a certain distance. The sound would feel a little more going a little more further away, which sounds good. But if you were not to do that, it would feel a little closer. It would feel that the sound is originating from a source which is a little closer to you. But it feels like, if you're listening to orchestral music, actually feels like there is a concert hall. You're engulfed in a concert hall. It gives you the kind of reverberation where you would start feeling that you're actually sitting in a concert hall listening to the orchestra, which is like amazing. I don't know how exactly have they how they have managed to do that, or whether that was the original intention, but it sounds amazing. Well, there you have it, the Tin Audio T2, T2 Pro, and the KZ AS10. My pick would be to go for the Tin Audio T2, but it's pretty much your choice. If you want a little energy in the bass, a little more detail in the bass, and you're okay with and maybe neutral sounding at the highs, and you're okay with the sound being a little harsh, then you could go for the Tin Audio T2 Pro. And if you want a warmer sound I won't say warmer, because like I mentioned, the AS10 do have a little harsh peak at the at 5.5 kilohertz, which will be very difficult for you to kind of bring down, considering that sound it's a peak with a very narrow bandwidth. So you'll have to kind of use like a 20 band equalizer, or something which has a parametric equalizers, where you can set the parameters. but they do sound good. They have a little fatter sound. So if you like, a little more depth in your sound from the aspect of vocals, or a little more, even from the orchestral perspective, a little more, oomph to the string section, or the horns. I would not, completely negate buying the AS10s, but the king of the ring, I bet it would be the T2. All right, thank you for watching.